Hi, my name is Adnan, and I chose to do my presentation on narrative therapy. So I initially chose this just because I thought externalizing the problem was a useful tool. However, learning more about the approach, I learned that it's much deeper, and the reasons for externalizing the problem have kind of a systematic, kind of it stems from a critique of like systemic oppression. Um, so it conceptualizes human problems as rooted in meaning-making systems rather than as like human pathology. So it's not just that, the person with the mental health problem, but their mental health problem is a result of larger systemic issues. Uh, and it is aligned with trauma-informed and culture-responsive care because it does not isolate the individuals from the broader context. So yeah, I just learned. I initially thought it was a cool tool, but it's actually like really pretty deep theory. Um, so narrative therapy was developed by Michael White and David Epson in the late 1980s. So it emerged during a shift in family therapy towards postmodernism. Essentially, before the clinician was the expert, and kind of this kind of challenged modernism's assumptions of objective truth. So, like the clinician does not have objective truth, and it assumes knowledge and beliefs are socially constructed, including psychology and shaped by cultural and institutional power. And basically it wants us the kind of the habit during that time was to pathologize clients and kind of put them like in a box with like a diagnosis, and this was a reaction to that phenomena. So key concepts, so it's a basically a critique of pathologizing clients, diagnostic labels objectify individuals, which obscure the systemic issues such as poverty, racism, and general norms that influence a person's development of a mental health issue. Like, rather than depression being framed as an individual pathology, it could be a result of structural inequity. So narrative therapy seeks to depathologize clients by placing their problems within relational power structures and how these power structures influence the individual's cognition, beliefs, ways of thinking, and how mental health issues are a result of a tension between these narratives and a person's like individuated values. So knowledge is constructed through power and discourse. So it's based on the premise that we story and create meaning of life using the dominant discourse. So there's like the dominant discourse that kind of is, different types of institutions kind of program us to think in a certain way. So since truth is socially constructive, the therapeutic process is not discovering truth, but by co-constructing and reauthoring the narrative. You know, people often come to therapy when their personal experience does not meet the broader narrative. So it was heavily, it was influenced by Michel Foucault, um, and he's all about basically, Foucault states that people are objectified. They objectify themselves and engage in their own subjugation through normalizing judgment. The dominant culture seeks to objectify people into the master narrative. Put people in different boxes. And this is a picture of the panopticon. Basically, it's this idea that people are basically brainwashed through institutional indoctrination to self-monitor themselves through different cultural narratives. Um, I mean, it's there's more to that, but like basically, it's kind of like this. There's this institutional cognitions that kind of like get programmed in us, and by externalizing conversations through narrative therapy, Employ the practice of objectification of the problem against cultural practices of objectifying people. So by externalizing the problem and making it into an object, it can deconstruct these different different types of institutional indoctrination that permeates our thinking. Um, so the objectification of the problem allows people to experience separation and freedom from the normative judgments they have been subjected to. So there's not really an assessment in narrative therapy. It's pretty counter to their fundamental concepts of, because if you diagnose a client, it objectifies them, puts them in a box as like having bipolar disorder or depression. So they're not really like, they don't, diagnosing isn't really a narrative therapy type of idea. They engage in deconstructive listening rather than kind of reflecting back the story like a person-centered person might. They look for different meanings or gaps, and then the collaboration. And they're listening for how they're impacted by the dominant discourse. So, like I was talking about. So externalization is a tool, an intervention, where the clinician teaches the client to, rather than identify with anxiety, say, I have anxiety. They make it the adjective and put it and create it and turn it into a noun. So rather than saying, dad has anger issues, they talk about how when does the anger get between you and your kids? Rather than he is lazy, how has the laziness impacted daily routines? Also, putting the in front of the noun adds a certain extra level of objectification, essentially separating the problem from the individual, from the individuals, to kind of work on it from a different perspective. So there's not this kind of like antagonization or polarization. And then there's mapping the problem. So once the problems have been objectified, there's collaboration with the clients to explore the history, scope, and impact of the problem over time. Basically, kind of looking at examining it over time, it can create different perspectives on the problem. So focuses on the length, breadth, and depth of the problem by asking, when did you first notice the problem? How is life different before it showed up? When is the problem strongest, weakest? Where in your life does it have the most influence, the least? How much of your life would you say it affects? Kind of looking at it from this like different perspective. And so by mapping the problem, the therapist is listening for exceptions to the problem story. There are critical entry points for change and reauthoring the narrative. Um, so the therapist primarily uses questions to connect, the unique outcome to the client's preferred values. Uh, So the therapist connects these unique outcomes through questions across past, present, future. And the idea is not to kind of create like a new magical like story, like a new magic narrative, but to rather take the existing narrative and like kind of weave in these unique outcomes to create like a thicker, what they call is like a thicker narrative. I'm just making up stuff. And so here is an example of externalization used in family therapy. It is used in this clip to kind of, decompress certain antagonization.
I don't want my Brian to change because he's a great kid and he knows what to do, and that's what's hard is the school just doesn't get it, and the school thinks that he's the bad guy and that he's the one doing all the bad things, but in reality he can't control it.
I told you it wasn't even my fault with the kid who
I
got
know.
in trouble.
I know.
We're just talking about the problem right now, and Sharon, it sounds like.
And I think the problem is that you don't take responsibility for your actions and you always blame other people for it.
Well, one of the reasons that we're using narrative therapy is because it really focuses on the fact that Sharon, you're not the problem, Lindsay, you're not the problem, Brian, you're not the problem. The problem is the problem, right? It's not the family, it's not the individuals, it's this problem. And that's what later on we're going to likely define and give it a name. So let's just stick with each person's perception of the story. So, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, because of this problem, the ADHD, he gets bullied a lot and he gets picked on so much. And what is he supposed to do if some kid's talking about him and how he can't be friends with anybody? He needs to stand up for himself, and you know, he's a good boy.
Brian, how do you feel? I mean, is that how it's happening at school?
Yeah, I mean, I think lately I've just been like all over the place. Like like can't focus in class. Like I get picked on a lot for that. I get picked on a lot for having two moms. I get picked on, just constantly. Teachers don't like me.
Do the kids call you names or anything like that?
Yeah, they call me Tweak from South Park.
Okay.
I kind of go crazy sometimes. And then they make fun of me for having two moms again, like stuff I don't want to share here probably.
I got you. That's tough. I mean, it's cool that you have two very loving mothers, but I understand that
But
there's
it's
stigma
yeah,
to
and it's
that.
also like I feel like I'm always in trouble and disappointing them. So that's kind of frustrating because they are good parents, and I don't know. It's been tough.
Well, it's not you. Again, like we said, there's this problem that's causing it, not Brian. So again, something that we're going to work through. So
In this video, it kind of exemplified how initially there was a lot of blaming and shaming and but by externalizing the problem, they're able to start working on it from this different perspective that kind of ameliorates this kind of like polarization. So, in externalizing the problem with the family experiences is, less blame. The family can gain a new perspective. In identifying unique outcomes, they can gain hope in the possibility of change as they gain a new perspective on the master narrative and kind of, reauthor their family identity. Cultural consideration. So this is a heavily, has a lot of cultural critiques. Basically, it's the primary mechanism is this idea that we are all kind of like, institutionally, brainwash, maybe not brainwashed, but our cognitions are heavily impacted by these, this master dominant discourse, and tension comes because we may have, that we may not align with that discourse. So it's very culturally relevant as far as like helping people from different cultures and how their culture may not align with the dominant culture. So strengths challenges the dominant narratives, limitations, risk of over intellectualizing, which may be hard to translate maybe. So strengths of this approach, redefines how problems are understood from individual pathology to systemic experience. Externalization reduces shame and blame. Is very culturally responsive, just because that's its primary mechanism is deconstructing these cultural narratives that are imbibed in us through institutional indoctrination. It can be applied both individually and within families. Limitations can be less structured than other interventions such as CBT. Narrative therapy can be abstract, may not suit clients with cognitive impairments, limited verbal expression, or a preference on concrete approaches. And it also it does work well with like either other approaches as well. My personal reflection. So initially, I just thought, externalization was kind of just like a neat trick, but apparently, it's like a really, really deep theory. Impacted by Derrida, Foucault. Basically, just how knowledge is constructed within us through, the different institutions that permeate society. Basically, like how, knowledge is constructed with us, and we kind of create these narratives. And by kind of bringing awareness, kind of like if we're not we can easily fall into like an unconscious program if we're not going to work a conscious program. I've been, previously interested in how institutions shape cognition. I'm interested in the process of indoctrination and, kind of challenging different unconscious narratives. I also just believe externalization is just a really good tool to use by externalizing the problem. Because when it's inside of us, it's really easy to distort. By externalizing it, it can work on it from like a different perspective. And here are my references.